welcome. If you are watching and listening now, it means you have chosen to give yourself a pause, a moment entirely your own, away from the noise of the day. This is Opulent Dreams, a place where time slows down, where stories flow gently, and where sleep arrives without being called. Tonight, I have the privilege of guiding you slowly towards rest. There is nothing you need to do. Simply listen and let go. If you wish, you can support this journey with a small gesture by following the channel, liking this video, and leaving a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. A quiet way of being present together, even from afar. For now, though, this time is yours. Lower the lights. Settle into a comfortable position. Allow your body to find its own balance. Soften your breathing. There is no need to control it. Just allow it to slow down. The world can wait. Your worries can remain outside this night. I wish you a deep, elegant, natural rest. Let yourself be gently carried. And when you are ready, let the dream begin. New York was sleeping beneath a slow, falling snow the afternoon Thomas first passed through the revolving doors of the St. Regis Hotel. He was 22 years old, wearing a coat far too thin for that winter, and carrying a folded letter in his pocket, a letter written by hand that offered him a job whose exact name no one had ever managed to explain to him. Secretary, assistant, companion. The words changed depending on who spoke them. The only certain thing was the name of the man he was going to work for, a name that in those years rang out like a golden bell across the whole city. Outside, the snowflakes drifted down slowly, very slowly, as though the sky had all the time in the world. Inside, the lobby received him with a warm, velvety silence. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like tame constellations, and their light scattered in golden droplets across the marble floor. Tomas paused for a moment, just a moment, to listen. There was a peaceful murmur of distant voices, the soft chime of one glass touching another, the whisper of a piano in some unseen drawing room. Everything there seemed to move at half speed, as if inside a warm dream from which one is in no hurry at all to wake. A concierge in white gloves showed him the way with a slow gesture of the hand. The young man walked across a carpet so soft that he could barely hear his own footsteps. He felt as though he were walking upon a thick cloud, and that sensation, instead of unsettling him, calmed him little by little, as if the whole hotel were breathing along with him and inviting him to slow the beating of his heart. The elevator was a small jewel of brass and mirrors. When the doors closed, Tomas saw himself reflected 1,000 times over in the shining walls, 1,000 versions of himself sinking gently into an endless gold. The car rose without a single jolt, almost floating, and on every floor a little bell gave off a faint note, a single note, sweet and round, that faded away before he could finish hearing it. Floor 12, floor 13, floor 14. The numbers went by like the beads of a quiet rosary. At last the elevator stopped with a sigh. Tomas stepped out into a long corridor, bathed in shadow, carpeted in red, lit by amber wall lamps that followed one another at regular intervals. He counted the doors as he walked, and the number on each one seemed to weigh more than the last. 1598, 1599, 1600. And finally, at the very end, a double door, wider than all the others, with a discreet bronze plate on which glimmered, very slowly, the number that would come to shape the rest of his life, 1601. Before knocking, Tomas closed his eyes and breathed. The air smelled of something strange and beautiful, a blend of fresh flowers, of candle wax, of expensive perfume, and of a warm scent he could not name. Behind that door there was music, the soft music of a gramophone, and beneath the music, other sounds more curious still, the rustle of a heavy fabric, a metallic tinkling, and something like a deep, animal purr that rose and fell with a lazy calm. The young man wondered, without fear, only with a drowsy curiosity, what sort of world awaited him on the other side. He had heard 1,000 stories about that man and that suite. They said the room was, all at once, a painter's studio, a small royal court, and a private zoo. They said that time worked differently there, that money flowed like water, and that reality bent itself to the whims of a genius with an impossible moustache. He raised his hand to knock, and at that very moment the door opened on its own, very slowly, pushed by a warm current of perfumed air. Before him stretched an enormous drawing room, wrapped in a golden, hazy light, the light of dozens of candles and of a single silk lamp that tinted the air the color of honey. There were flowers everywhere, huge bouquets of roses and tuberoses resting on the floor, on the chairs, upon the mantelpiece, so many flowers that the whole room seemed to breathe their scent like a slow and contented chest. And in the middle of it all, with his back to the door, motionless before a great window through which the snow was still falling, stood a figure wrapped in a long, gleaming robe. He did not turn. He said nothing. He only lifted a hand into the air with infinite slowness, like someone greeting a person arriving from very far away, from the depths of a dream, and in a whisper barely audible, he spoke a single word of welcome. Thomas stepped inside. The door closed softly behind him, and the noisy world of the street, the snow, the cars, the whole city, were left behind like a memory already beginning to melt away. It took Thomas a few seconds to accustom his eyes to the honeyed light of the drawing room. Little by little, among the flowers and the candles, the details began to appear, the way things rise from the bottom of a pond when the water grows still. He saw an easel covered with a cloth. He saw animal hides spread across the divans. He saw a long table full of gleaming objects whose purpose he could not begin to guess. And then, in a far corner, beside a small lamp with a green shade, he discovered a woman sitting very still at a writing desk. She was not young, and yet there was something timeless about her, something that refused to be measured in years. She was dressed in dark clothes, with an almost severe simplicity that stood in contrast to all the opulence of the room, and she wore her hair pinned back with perfect precision. She was bent over a great ledger, and in her hand she held a pen that moved slowly, tracing figures in very long columns. She did not look up when the young man came in. She finished her sum first, with all the calm in the world, and only afterward, very slowly, did she raise her eyes to him. "So you are the new one," she said, in a low, serene voice, a voice that had no need to rise in order to be obeyed. "Come closer. Let me see you." Thomas obeyed. He walked across the thick carpet until he stopped at a respectful distance from the desk. She looked him over from head to toe, unhurried, with the same attention a jeweler gives a stone before deciding its worth. There was nothing hostile in that gaze, but nothing tender either. It was the gaze of someone who had spent an entire lifetime calculating the exact price of things and who was rarely mistaken. "In this house," she said at last, "each of us has a task. He dreams, he paints, he signs, and I make certain that all those dreams become something that can be kept. Do you understand what I mean?" The young man was not entirely sure that he did, but he nodded slowly, and she seemed satisfied with the gesture. With a soft movement of her hand, she invited him to come a little closer to the edge of the desk, and Thomas could see then what lay upon the dark wood. There were letters and contracts held down by heavy glass paperweights. There was a small notebook, bound in leather, full of names and numbers written in a tiny hand, and there was, in one corner, inside a half-open velvet box, something that gave off a warm and deep gleam, a gleam that was neither that of the candles nor that of the lamps. They were ingots, small bars of gold, lined up one beside another with the same care with which books are arranged on a shelf. The woman looked at them for a moment, and for the first time something like a smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "Gold does not care about fashion," she said, almost to herself. "It does not rise or fall with the whims of collectors. It does not spoil. It does not rot. It does not grow old. It is here today, and it will be here tomorrow, and it will be here long after all of us are gone. That is why I like it. It is the only truly peaceful thing that exists." Thomas listened, and the more he listened, the more he felt his own thoughts grow slower, more orderly, like the figures in those perfect columns. She explained to him, never once raising her voice, what his duties would be. He would have to receive the collectors and keep them waiting for exactly the right length of time, neither too much nor too little. He would have to carry envelopes and boxes from one end of the city to the other. He would have to write down in the notebook every visit, every commission, every sum that had been promised. And above all things, he would have to remember one simple rule, that in this house art was always paid for in advance and always in something one could touch. "The others believe the genius is the one in charge here," she added, closing the velvet box slowly. "And in a certain way that is true. But a genius needs someone to fasten his shoes, to buy his train ticket, to count the money while he gazes at the clouds. Without that person, the genius starves to death in a corner. With me, on the other hand." She paused, a long pause, and into that pause fit an entire lifetime of silent work. "With me, he has become a fortune that walks." She bent once more over her ledger, and the pen resumed its slow journey across the page. Thomas understood that the audience was over. He stepped back, and then back again, without a sound, while the woman added and subtracted in the green light of her lamp, unshakable as some ancient goddess busy weighing the fate of the world. Through the great window, the blue dusk of the snow still drifted in, and somewhere in the suite, beyond the flowers and the candles, that deep and lazy purr rose once again into the air, inviting the young man to venture further still into that golden and drowsy world. The purr was coming from behind a painted screen, a tall screen covered with peacocks and golden branches. Thomas approached with caution, guided by that warm and steady sound, and as he peered around it, he discovered, lying upon a cushion of garnet-coloured silk, the most beautiful animal he had ever seen in his life. It was a cat but not an ordinary cat. It was the size of a medium dog, its coat covered with golden and black spots, spots that coiled one over another like the letters of a secret alphabet. Its eyes, half open, were a liquid and serene green, and they looked at him without fear and without curiosity, with the sovereign indifference of one who knows himself to be the master of all that surrounds him. From its neck hung a wide collar, and from that collar ran a long leash that rested slack upon the carpet. "His name is Babu," said a voice behind him, the soft gramophone voice made person. Thomas turned around. For the first time he had him before his eyes, the man in the gleaming robe, the genius with the impossible moustache. Up close, he seemed at once older and more childlike than the young man had imagined. His eyes were enormous and dark, and they darted from side to side with a restless quickness, pausing on each object as though seeing it for the very first time. He drew near to the cat with short and ceremonious steps, leaned over it, and stroked its head with the tip of one finger. "He is an ocelot," he murmured, drawing out the syllables with delight. "A little tiger of the jungle who has decided to live among us, among the flowers and the candles, because he understands better than any person that life is to be lived slowly and in luxury." Tomasz looked at the leash that held the animal, and only then did he notice the brilliance it gave off. It was no ordinary leather leash. It was studded, from one end to the other, with small stones that glittered in the candlelight, some red, some blue, some clear as drops of frozen water. The entire fortune of a whole family slept coiled around the neck of that golden cat, and the cat did not even know it, nor did it care, and perhaps for that very reason the whole thing was more beautiful still. "Tomorrow we shall go out for a walk," the master announced, rising with some effort. "We shall dine at the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, and Babu will come with us, and he will sit at the table like a gentleman, and the other diners will drop their spoons in surprise. You will walk behind, my boy, holding the leash, and you will feel how all the gazes of the city come to rest upon you. Do not be afraid. It is pleasant. One grows used to being looked at soon enough." That night, Thomas, little by little, discovered the corners of the suite, and in each corner some small marvel awaited him. Upon one table slept a bouquet of roses so large it scarcely fit in its vase. In a golden cage beside the window, a bird with blue feathers dozed with its head tucked beneath its wing. From the ceiling hung, held by almost invisible threads, strange and delicate objects that turned very slowly with the current of the air, casting soft shadows upon the walls. The master explained to him that he never travelled alone, that when he moved from one city to another, he did so always in a long black motor car. A motor car he had filled with fresh flowers until there was scarcely any room left to sit. He liked, he said, to cross the world inside a moving garden, breathing the scent of tuberoses while the streets went slowly by on the other side of the glass. And wherever he went, he was accompanied by his animals, his flowers, his trunks full of useless and precious objects, an entire tiny and perfumed court that travelled with him as a snail carries its house upon its back. "Money," he said, as he let himself fall into an enormous armchair and sank his hands into the ocelot's fur, "is not for keeping in a bank, inside a cold and dark box. Money is for turning into spectacle, into perfume, into stones that shine, into cats that purr. It is for transforming every instant of life into an unforgettable scene. Everything else is wasted time. Tomas listened to him from the edge of a divan, his eyelids growing heavier and heavier. The master's voice had a strange effect upon him, an effect like that of warm wine or of a thick blanket on a winter's night. The words followed one another slowly, without a single jolt, and all around him the candles burned with a still flame, and the flowers breathed, and the ocelot purred, and the snow went on falling beyond the glass, slow, very slow, covering everything with a white and gentle silence. At some point, without noticing, the young man let his head rest against the back of the divan, and while the genius spoke on and on of precious stones and rolling gardens, Tomas felt himself sinking sweetly into the first of the many golden nights that awaited him in that world stopped still in time. Tomas awoke the following morning to the grey, soft light of winter slipping between the curtains. For an instant he did not know where he was. Then he remembered the flowers, the candles, the sleeping ocelot, and a warm calm spread through his whole body. He rose slowly, and as he came out into the great drawing room, he found the master already seated at a long table by the window. Absorbed in a task the young man could not comprehend. Upon the table there was paper, a great deal of paper, piles and piles of white sheets, perfectly smooth, perfectly empty, stacked one beside another until they formed a small city of pale towers. There were so many that Thomas would not have known how to count them even in a whole afternoon. And the master, a pen in his hand and a bottle of ink to his right, was taking the sheets one by one, pausing barely a second over each of them. At first, the young man thought he was writing letters, but as he drew closer, he understood that there were no letters, nor drawings, nor words. On each sheet, the master traced only one thing, always the same, his signature. A wide and elegant signature, with a great opening stroke that rose like a wave and then descended into a succession of confident curves. He would trace it, set the sheet aside, take up the next, and begin again. "Come here, my boy," he said, without lifting his gaze. "Help me. You will pass me the sheets from this side, and I will leave them signed on that side. It is a simple task, almost a game." Thomas sat down beside him and began to help. He would take a sheet from the pile on the left, slide it carefully to the center of the table, and wait. The master would dip the pen in the ink, with a slow and precise gesture, and let fall upon the paper that unmistakable signature. Then Thomas would draw away the already signed sheet and place it, with the same softness, upon the pile on the right, and then another, still. Very soon, without noticing, the two of them fell into a rhythm, a beautiful and lulling rhythm made of small sounds that repeated over and over again. The rustle of the paper as it slid across the wood, the faint splash of the pen sinking into the bottle of ink, the whisper of the nib travelling across the sheet, a brief whisper that rose and fell following the line of the signature, and once more the rustle of the paper, and once more the ink, and once more the whisper, over and over, like the swaying of the waves on a very peaceful shore. "Each of these sheets," the master murmured, while the pen went on tracing its curves, "is worth more than it seems. Now it is nothing. Now it is only paper, and my name. But one day, in another place, other hands will lay colors and shapes upon them, and then each sheet will become a little window, a little dream that will hang upon someone's wall. I sign the windows before they exist. I sign the dreams that have not yet been dreamed. Thomas did not fully understand those words, but he had no need to understand them. It was enough for him to follow the rhythm, to let himself be carried by the slow and steady swaying of the task. The pile on the left dwindled very slowly, and the one on the right grew with the same slowness, and between the two of them time seemed to have stopped, or rather seemed to have turned circular, a time without beginning or end, made only of the sweet repetition of the same gesture. Outside the city was waking, but its noises arrived muffled by the snow and by the window panes, turned into a distant and peaceful hum. Inside there existed only the paper, the ink, and the whisper of the pen. The master signed and signed, his eyes half closed, a faint smile upon his lips, like one reciting under his breath a prayer he knows by heart. Now and then he would let slip a sigh of contentment, take a sip of water, and begin again. It was said that over the years he signed thousands upon thousands of sheets in this way, so many that not even he could have remembered the number. Hundreds of thousands of blank pages scattered across the world, each one carrying his name toward a destiny he would never come to know. And yet, watching him work that morning, with the pen dancing slowly across the paper, there was nothing of greed in the gesture, nothing of haste. There was only rhythm and calm and the strange serenity of a task that never came to an end. Little by little, lulled by the swaying of the paper and the ink, Thomas noticed that his own movements grew slower, looser. His hands went on passing the sheets, but his mind began to float, to drift gently toward another place, a warm and silent place where white pages fell from the sky like snowflakes, slowly, very slowly, covering everything with their serene mantle. That night, at last, they went out to dine. The long black motor car was waiting in front of the hotel, and indeed it was full of flowers, so full that Tomas had to carefully push aside a bouquet of tuberoses in order to sit down. The master climbed in last, with Babu, the ocelot held by his leash of precious stones, and throughout the whole journey he gazed out of the window at the lights of the city, which slid slowly across his face like the reflection of water. The restaurant was one of the most expensive in Manhattan, a place of the whitest tablecloths, of fine crystal, and of waiters who moved without making any sound at all. When the master entered, with his cloak, his cane, and his golden cat, a murmur ran through the tables, and then a silence, and then the murmur once more. But he advanced among all those gazes as if he did not see them, or as if he had been waiting for them his whole life, and he sat down at the finest table with the naturalness of a king returning to his throne. Thomas took a chair at his side, still dazzled. Upon the tableware shone in the candlelight. A young waiter came to pour the water, and his hands trembled slightly with emotion as he did so. The master noticed him at once. He watched him for a moment with his great dark eyes, and then he gave him a kind smile, a smile that put the young man at ease in an instant. During the meal, something happened that Thomas would never forget. The master barely tasted the dishes that were set before him. Instead, he took a cloth napkin, spread it out carefully upon the table, drew from his waistcoat pocket a small pencil, and began to draw. He did it slowly, without any apparent effort, letting his hand glide along the cloth on its own. From the lines a figure gradually emerged, a long face, a pair of dreaming eyes, a moustache that curled into the air like two very, fine antenna. In a few minutes, the napkin had ceased to be a napkin and had become a small portrait full of grace. When he had finished, the master called over the young waiter, the one with the trembling hands. The young man came, a little frightened, fearing perhaps that he had made some mistake. But the master held out the napkin to him with both hands, like one handing over a sacred object, and said to him, in his soft and ceremonious voice, "Take this, my son. Keep it well. I do not give it to you as a tip. I give it to you as a gift. This napkin is worth far more than $100. It is worth more than you can imagine. And one day, when you no longer remember this evening, it will still be worth something, and it will pull you out of some difficulty, and then you will remember me, and you will smile." The waiter took the napkin with infinite care, as though he feared it might come apart between his fingers. He looked at it, looked at the master, looked at the napkin again, and his eyes filled with a moist gleam. He did not know what to say. He merely bowed his head, murmuring thanks that could scarcely be heard, and withdrew, walking backward, not daring to turn around, pressing that unexpected treasure against his chest. "You see, my boy," the master said then, turning toward Tomas with an amused air. "Others give coins, give banknotes, give things that are spent and forgotten. Today's banknote will no longer exist tomorrow. It will have bought a loaf of bread, a coffee, and vanished. But a drawing is not spent. A drawing is kept, is framed, is hung upon the wall, is passed from parents to children. I do not hand out money. I hand out little pieces of eternity, disguised as a tip." He laughed softly, pleased with his own idea, and went on barely eating, while he contemplated the happiness of the young waiter across the room. And Thomas understood that there was in that man, alongside his vanity and his craving for spectacle, a strange and genuine generosity, a way all his own of handing out wonder to those around him. Over the following weeks, the young man would see the same scene repeat itself again and again in the corridors of the hotel, in the taxis, in the shops, to the bellboys who carried up his luggage, to the maids who brought his breakfast, to the white-gloved elevator operator. To all of them he gave, instead of a coin, a small drawing sketched on a menu, on an envelope, in the margin of a newspaper. And all of them, without exception, kept that little scribble with the same reverence with which one keeps a relic, sensing that they held in their hands something that time would only make more beautiful. On the way back to the hotel, already in the small hours, with the city hushed beneath the snow and the ocelot asleep on the master's lap, Thomas felt sleep wrapping itself around him once more, sweet and heavy. And as the motor car moved slowly among the lights, he imagined a world full of drawn napkins, tucked away in drawers and hung on little walls. An entire world perfumed by the silent generosity of a man who gave away eternity. The days in the suite followed one another without haste, and one quiet morning, while the snow was falling once again beyond the window, some visitors arrived who were different from the usual ones. They were not art collectors. They were businessmen, in well-pressed suits and carrying leather briefcases, and their faces wore a mixture of admiration and nervousness. Gala received them from her desk with the green lamp. She had them sit down, offered them something to drink, and listened in silence to what they had come to propose. It was, as Thomas gradually understood, a rather unusual commission. Those men manufactured a small sweet, a round sweet, mounted upon a little stick, designed so that children could suck it without dirtying their hands. The sweet sold well, but it was missing something. It was missing a sign, a small emblem that people would recognize at once in any corner of the world. The master, who until then had remained reclined in his armchair, absently stroking the ocelot, suddenly opened his eyes with interest. He liked commissions of this kind. He liked them precisely because other artists scorned them, because they considered it unworthy to mix art with commerce. He thought exactly the opposite. He thought that a sign capable of traveling across the whole planet, of appearing in a million shop windows, was worth as much as the most solemn painting hanging in the most solemn of museums. "Give me a piece of paper," he said simply, sitting up in his armchair. Thomas looked around him. There were no sheets at hand. The blank sheets were locked away, awaiting their turn. The only thing he could find was that day's newspaper, folded upon a little table. He held it out to the master, a little ashamed, but the master seemed not to mind in the least. He spread the newspaper over his knees, drew out his usual pencil, and sat for a moment lost in thought, his eyes half closed, like one listening to a music that only he can hear. And then he began to draw. He did it slowly, with soft and confident strokes, never erasing, never hesitating. First he drew a flower, a simple daisy with rounded petals. Then he enclosed the flower within a shape that recalled a small wave, a scallop, like the edge of an embroidered tablecloth. Afterward, in the center of the flower, he wrote a name in clear and cheerful letters. And finally, with a gesture that seemed to Tomasz the most important of all, he took the whole image and decided that it should not go on the side, nor at the bottom, nor hidden away, but at the very top, in the highest place, so that it would always be seen, so that no finger could cover it while holding the sweet. "Here," he said, pointing to the summit of the drawing, "the crown always goes on the head, never on the feet. Let the world see it from afar." It took him not even an hour. When he had finished, he lifted the newspaper with both hands and contemplated his work with a satisfied smile. The businessmen drew near to look, and their faces lit up little by little, for they understood at once that this small flower had something special about it, a simple and luminous grace that engraved itself in the memory without effort. It was the kind of image a child could recognize even before learning to read. Gala said nothing. She merely wrote in her leather-bound notebook a figure, a generous figure, and slid it across the table toward the visitors. They looked at it, swallowed, glanced at one another, and finally nodded. They knew it was a great deal of money for a drawing made in less than an hour on an old newspaper. But they knew, too, that this flower would accompany them for decades, that it would travel with them through every country in the world, and that no price was too high for a sign destined for eternity. "A drawing of 1 hour," the master remarked to Tomasz afterward when they were alone, "can take a whole lifetime to ripen inside a person. The hand works quickly, yes, but for the hand to know exactly where to place each line, 50 years of looking, of dreaming, of making mistakes have first had to pass. What they are paying for is not the hour. What they are paying for is the whole life that lies behind that hour." That night, imagine the small yellow flower multiplying, leaping from one shop window to another, crossing borders, appearing in the hands of children in countries whose names he did not even know. And that thought, instead of stirring him up, calmed him little by little, as though he were counting golden sheep, leaping one after another over an endless fence. He thought too of the other commissions that, as he had heard, the master had accepted over the years, advertisements for chocolate, for medicine, for companies that cross the sky. All of them, little seeds wonder sown into the everyday lives of ordinary people. And with the yellow flower turning very slowly behind his eyelids, the young man fell once again into a deep sleep. The months passed. The New York snow melted away at last, and the time came to cross the ocean. The master could not bear endless winters. The moment he sensed that the days were beginning to lengthen, he felt the call of his own land, of the golden and dry light of the Catalonia of his childhood. And so, one fine day, the trunks were filled, the flowers were shared out among the hotel staff, the ocelot was settled into his travelling basket, and the whole little court set out for Spain. After a long journey of which Thomas would afterward keep no more than scraps of dream, they arrived at a tiny village, lost among fields and gentle hills. And there, rising above the stone rooftops, half hidden among the tallest cypresses, the castle appeared. It was an ancient fortress, very ancient, with thick walls and blunted towers, with ivy climbing up the walls and narrow windows, gazing out toward the valley like half-closed eyes. The master had bought it years before, restored it stone by stone, and given it to Gala as one gives away a kingdom. "This place is hers," he explained to Thomas in a low voice, almost with reverence, as the motor car drew slowly near along the dirt road. "Entirely hers. Here she rests, here she reigns, here she withdraws from the world when the world wearies her. And here there is a rule, my boy, a rule that is never broken." The young man looked at him, intrigued. The master smiled with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "I cannot come to this castle whenever I please. I cannot cross that door of my own will. I may visit her only if she invites me, and only if she writes it to me. A letter in her own hand, granting me leave to come up to her rooms. Without that letter, I stay below, in the garden, waiting like a young man in love. And do you know something? I find it beautiful. It is the most beautiful thing I know. Love needs distance so as not to wither. It needs closed doors and letters and waiting." Thomas said nothing, but the idea stayed engraved in him, and for a long time he would remember it as one of the strangest and most tender things he had ever heard in his life. The castle within was cool and silent, a silence different from that of the New York suite, deeper, more ancient, made of centuries of stone. The light came in through the narrow windows in dusty beams, and in each beam of light floated thousands of tiny motes that rose and fell with an infinite slowness. The floors were of worn tile, and they creaked softly underfoot. Everywhere there were objects the master had placed with great care. Elephants on very long legs, impossible pieces of furniture, paintings hidden away in the most unexpected corners. Outside, the garden was a place of dream. There were hedges clipped into whimsical shapes, gravel paths that wound between the trees, and a small pond in whose still surface the cypresses and the sky were reflected. In one corner, in the shade, rested some white sculptures half covered by the ivy, as though they had lain sleeping there since the beginning of time. The air smelled of warm earth, of laurel, of jasmine, and was full of the lazy humming of the bees and the distant song of some hidden bird. In the afternoons, when the heat pressed down, the master would sit in the shade of a grapevine in a wicker chair and remain there for hours, doing nothing, contemplating the trembling of the leaves against the light. Sometimes he would draw a little, sometimes he would doze, sometimes he would simply look, with his great dark eyes wide open, as if trying to learn by heart every detail of that peaceful garden. Thomas would sit nearby, on a stone bench, and share that golden silence with him, with no need for words. "In the city," the master said one of those afternoons, almost in a whisper, "one makes noise, one puts on a costume, one becomes a spectacle. It is necessary, and besides, it is amusing. But here, in Gala's garden, one takes off the costume and rests. Here there is no one to impress, only the bees and the cypresses and the still water of the pond. Here time does not run. Time sits down beside us and takes its nap." And it was true. In that place, time seemed to have stopped forever. The hours melted one into another, long and sweet as honey, and there was nothing to do, nor anywhere to go, nor any hurry to attend to. There was only the humming of the bees, and the light filtering through the leaves, and the coolness of the stone, and every now and then the murmur of a fountain that flowed somewhere hidden in the garden. Thomas, seated on his bench, his back against the warm wall, felt his eyelids grow heavy once again. The gentle breeze caressed his face, laden with the scents of the garden. Somewhere in the castle, behind one of those narrow windows, Gala was perhaps writing one of her letters. And lulled by the golden humming of the bees, the young man closed his eyes and let himself be carried very slowly into the heart of the afternoon. The summer went slowly on, and with it there passed many afternoons in the garden of the castle. Thomas had stopped counting the days. He had come to understand, little by little, that in that world time was not measured as it was in other places, and that the best thing he could do was to let himself be carried by its slow and warm current, without resisting, like a leaf that floats downstream toward the sea. One of those nights, the master asked to be taken up to his highest room, the one in the tower, the one with a narrow window opening out toward the valley. He was tired, he said, with an ancient and sweet weariness, the weariness of one who has lived many lives within a single one. Thomas accompanied him up the stone stairs, holding him by the arm, while the candles cast their trembling shadows upon the walls. The room was simple and cool. There was a bed of dark wood, covered with an embroidered quilt, and beside it a little table with a jug of water and a small clock that ticked very quietly, almost shyly. The master let himself fall upon the pillows with a long sigh, and for a while he lay gazing at the ceiling, following with his eyes the ancient beams and the patches of damp that traced, so he said, landscapes and faces invisible to everyone else. "It has been a beautiful life, my boy," he murmured at last, in a very soft voice, "a life full of gold, of flowers, of animals, of wonder. And do you know what is the most curious thing? That now, as I remember it all, the figures do not stay with me. I do not recall how much each thing was worth. Only the images stay with me. The snow falling beyond the glass of the hotel, the gleam of Babu's collar, the face of that waiter as he received his napkin, the little yellow flower turning in my head, the humming of the bees in Gala's garden. That is the only thing one carries away. The images, the dreams. He closed his eyes for a moment, and a peaceful smile formed upon his lips beneath the fine moustache that was already beginning to lose its impossible shape. Tomas listened in silence, feeling how the calm of the room settled inside his chest and loosened, little by little, every muscle in his body. They say gold is the only peaceful thing that exists, the master went on, his eyes still closed. That is what you used to say, do you remember? But I have discovered something more peaceful still, more peaceful than gold, more peaceful than precious stones, more peaceful than the sleeping castle. Sleep, my boy, sleep is the greatest of all luxuries. To be able to close one's eyes, to let the world go on turning by itself while one rests, that cannot be bought with ingots, and yet every night it is given to us as a gift. His voice grew slower, lower, more spaced out. The words fell gently, like the last drops of a fountain that is going quiet. Outside, the valley was completely silent. Not a single motor car could be heard, not a voice, not a clock, other than that shy ticking on the little table. Only, very now and then, from the garden came the soft song of a cricket, and then silence again, long and deep and perfect. The master was already breathing in a steady way, deep, with that unhurried rhythm that comes before true sleep. His chest rose and fell slowly, very slowly, like the swell of a sea at rest. Babu, the ocelot, had made himself comfortable at the foot of the bed, curled into a golden ball, and he too purred more and more softly until his purr blended with the master's breathing, and one could no longer tell which was which. Tomasz rose very carefully, taking care to make no sound. One by one he put out the candles, leaving only the smallest one lit, whose tiny flame barely illuminated a golden circle around the bed. He went to the narrow window and gazed, for the last time that night, at the sleeping valley beneath the moon. The motionless cypresses, the stone rooftops, the still pond glinting far below like a forgotten mirror. Everything was calm. Everything was in its place. The genius slept, and the ocelot slept, and the whole castle seemed to have closed its eyes, and the world, for once, asked nothing of anyone. And so, without any hurry at all, the great golden life of the master dissolved into sleep, just as a lump of sugar dissolves slowly in a cup of warm milk. The gold and the flowers dissolved, the snow and the candles, the blank sheets and the drawn napkins, the limousines full of tuberoses and the collar of precious stones. Everything grew soft and blurred and light until it became nothing more than a quiet breathing in an ancient tower beneath the moon of Catalonia. And now, while the genius rests, and the ocelot purrs, and the last candle goes out with a sigh, you too may let go of everything. Let your eyelids close, very slowly. Let your breathing grow slow and deep, like his. There is nothing to do, and nowhere to go. There remains only the golden silence, and the greatest of all luxuries, which is to sleep. Good night.